Hello, welcome to the Live at Five. And today we're going to be talking about effective ways to get clients to book in with you. So I'm going to look at the different ways that counselors can offer to clients in order to get them booked in. And there's three main things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about offering clients a full free session, offering clients a short initial free conversation, and then the alternative, which is getting people booked in straight away for a paid session. And we'll talk about each of those and the pros and cons of each so that you can make a decision about what's right for you. So welcome. If you're just joining me, do say hello in the comments. And if you're watching the replay on Facebook, then please pop #replay into the comments, and then I know who's watched it and I can have a chat with you, see how you're getting on. So hopefully this is a subject that you've had to think about. And I think especially if you're somebody who's just starting out in private practice, you've maybe been playing around and seeing what feels best for you. And I know when I started out in private practice, I did sort of have a think about, was I going to offer a free session to begin with, or was I going to offer a phone call, or would I go straight into paid sessions? So we've got Janet here. Hello, Janet. And in the end, what I opted for was I opted to go for a short conversation and followed by a paid session. But there are people who decide to go in and offer a full session. So it's really interesting to see what people do and why. And if you have a look on my page, I asked people yesterday what they did and why. And it was really interesting to read what some of the answers were and why people have opted for different things. And I would say, actually, the vast majority of people opt for almost like the middle ground, which is not the free one, not the paid one, but a sort of short, free introductory chat. And I think that's sort of quite interesting that most people opt for that, because if you decide to opt for something else, then you may be losing out on those people who have maybe thought that that's what they're going to get, that they will get this short introductory session. So it's just worth thinking about that. But I'll explain what happened to me and why I ended up where I ended up. And I did do that for a specific reason, which I'll explain as long as I remember more towards the end of the session. So here we go. We've got Janet and Pippa here. And you may want to pop into the comments. What do you do? Do you do a sort of short free call, which is what quite a lot of people do, or do you have a different model? So let's just have a think then about the advantages of doing the short free conversation. And I would say that most people would say it's a great way of quickly screening people. Some people like to do it because they want to make sure that they feel safe with the particular person who is contacting them. And that, especially I think as so many of us now have moved into, people book perhaps by email, or even they might book in directly from a website. Some of us can feel a bit uncertain about that, a bit uneasy with it. And as a way of really looking after ourselves, we'd prefer to do some sort of screening session first. And that would be like the 15 to 30 minute session. And that's what Pippa does. I do a 20-minute free call, specifically not counselling. And I think that's a really interesting thing to actually pick up on there, specifically not counselling. Because what can happen, especially if you're not terribly experienced, and this, believe me, this happened to me, is that you can get pulled into people actually really trying to get a bit of counselling, and not because they're sort of thinking, oh, I'll get a bit of free counselling. It's just because they don't really understand what the process is. And so I think it's quite important, if you are doing a call, is to sort of clarify about what the call's going to be about. So, say somebody emails you, when you email back, you could just lay out some of what the call is and what it isn't, so that they don't come on expecting to get, a 30-minute free session that's actually going to go into counselling. Because that can be another of the disadvantages of something like this, is that it isn't a counselling session, and people might go in too deep. And when they're you've just arranged a free session and they're on the end of a phone somewhere, you don't know where they are, you don't know if they're safe. There's these sorts of things to consider. You want to keep them safe. You haven't set anything up in terms of safeguarding. What if they suddenly were to tell you something quite alarming? So, it's thinking about how can you keep both yourself and the client safe. And like Pippa says, if you sort of tell them it's specifically not counselling, you can actually stop them if they start going in too deep as well. And what I'm going to do next week is, this week I'm talking about the advantages and disadvantages of the different ways of doing the calls. But next week we're going to talk a bit more about doing the sort of introductory 15 to 20 minute to 30-minute call. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about it. But yeah, I mean, it's helpful to set those boundaries, but it's also helpful from the point of view of, being able to do that screening. And that is why a lot of people would do it that way. And obviously for you as a therapist, if it's only 15 to 20 minutes, that doesn't take up too much of your time. And especially, and it's not unknown for people to get really busy with inquiries, doing a whole lot of free sessions, especially if they're an hour long, that could take up quite a bit of your time and you're not getting paid for that. So, that's another factor to bring into your consideration is, if you're thinking about doing an hour's free session, how many inquiries have you got coming in? Are you going to see everybody, or are you going to have some other sort of screening thing in place, in case you do get lots of people asking for that initial free hour? Because there's a limit to how much of that you could fit in a week. And believe me, I have known people who found just keeping up with the free 15 to 20-minute calls can actually be quite difficult. And I've worked with people who've actually been that busy. So, it is thinking about you and what suits you and your timetable and your availability as well. So I'm just going to check my notes here. I've got them written up on a little screen to see if there's anything else that I wanted to talk about in terms of, helping you to think about which one you could do. So I think, the free call, or, any of these sorts of calls actually gives the client a chance to build up the trust with you. And I can remember, certainly for me, having a free conversation, not a free session, a free conversation. And she talked about the importance of, acceptance, and that, just that, I felt so accepted by her that I then booked and worked with her for quite some considerable time. So you really can create that connection with people in that short call. So it really is worth it from that point of view. And obviously, as I've said, it takes less time. In terms of the sort of disadvantages, because you're not going into it in depth, there may be stuff that you might miss, and you might then need to get them in and do the proper full assessment in that first session where they're actually paying you. The other thing is, it may be that you'll think that you can take them on, but actually when you start exploring it in a bit more depth, when you get in front of them, you may find that you can't take them on. So that might be, again, it's about setting expectations. Set the expectations. What we'll do next is we'll book you in where we'll really sort of sit and talk together. You can come to my room, you can try a full session out with me, we'll do an assessment, and we'll take it from there. Which, would help them to know that it gives you a way out if it turns out that there's something that you haven't uncovered. It also gives them an out as well if they decide that you're not the person for you. But of course, by that time, you've spent maybe an hour and a half on them, for which you would have been paid for an hour. So it might take slightly longer before you really, really get them sort of committed and on board than it would if you did a sort of full assessment at the start. And with both the free session and the free conversation, it just takes longer. There's more steps. There's more steps to it, really. So, whereas if you just book someone in straight away and they come for that paid assessment, that's it, you've got started, and you can still turn them away at the end of that first session. So it can be quicker if you book people in for a paid assessment. And if you're very busy, that might be the answer for you. And particularly perhaps if you're a more experienced therapist and you are busy and you feel sort of okay with seeing people straight away, that might be the route for you to do that. Okay, so in terms of sort of free sessions, I was just wondering if there's anything else I wanted to talk to you about. I guess the real advantage is that, you know, it gives people a chance to really try you out. And someone's commented on the thread where I asked about it, and they said, you know, for me this is important because it gives people the chance to try out different therapists and to really make that informed choice. And so for that person, you know, it's really coming from their values that this is an important part of recruiting a client, is that they want clients to try out different people and be really committed to them. What I would warn you about in terms of if that's a model that you're thinking about are just sort of 2 or 3 things that sort of maybe I felt a bit uncomfortable with and why I didn't choose it. I didn't want people to feel that in a sense, I didn't want to influence people to book in with me on the basis that they could get their first session free, because I just felt that that might be pushing them towards making a decision. You know, I wanted people to choose me because they want to work with me, not because, you know, it might be worth a try. Uh, so that was sort of part of what was going on for me in that. So that's the reason really why I sort of veered away from offering that full first free session. And then I think the other sort of disadvantages that you might want to be aware of is that you might get more no-shows, or you might get people who book a free session or book a series of free sessions and try and get some free sessions simply because they can't afford it. Whereas sometimes if you basically ask people to pay for a session, you know, they're either going to pay for it or they're not going to pay for it. And if they're not going to pay for it, that you've actually saved yourself quite a lot of time in terms of if they can't afford it. So I know there's this sort of thing about, oh, you know, does it make it more difficult for people to afford? Well, they've got to afford it anyway. And yes, I get that sort of like in a way, you know, you're allowing people to test it out before they make an investment. But I mean, you know, when I was a client and I was trying people out, I just went and paid for 3 sessions with 3 different therapists because I wanted to try them out. I know that's not the way everybody would think, but I think, you know, in some ways it's about setting expectations in your client group and to say, this is why I do it. This is my rationale, and putting that on your website so they can see why you do it. So, you know, it's just something to think about, really. So I'm just going to come away from my notes and just double check and see if I've got any more. Yeah, I've got a little question here. This is a really good question. I'm going to pop it up on the screen. I wonder about what you do about your privacy notice when having a pre-session chat. I don't have a website, so would need to email a copy. Yeah, I mean, what I would say about that is it's an really interesting question, and I'm not prepared for the question, so I'm thinking about it on my feet. I mean, I'd say, yeah, by all means, email a copy. But also, I think there's the stuff about how long you'd retain the information for as well. So, you know, you might want to have something in your privacy notice, such as, you know, you would only keep that information for a certain amount of time. And, you know, you might say, unless you book in with us for a session, this will be destroyed immediately, you know. Having said that, you know, you might like to keep, if you're sort of turning people away because you've got a waiting list, you might want to have some sort of privacy notice that allows you to keep people on a waiting list for a while. I'm just sort of thinking about the ramifications of what you're saying. The other thing is to think, you know, it's not really counselling, so you might not be taking the in-depth notes where you would need to have like a published privacy policy, because part of the reason why we need a published privacy policy is because we're dealing with sensitive data. So again, you know, when you're setting your expectations, you might like to set your expectations around that. But I think actually sending a little privacy notice out with your email, if you say something, you sort of say to someone, okay, let's arrange to meet on such and such a date, here's the phone number or whatever. You could also include the privacy notice as an attachment, because it immediately gives that air of professionalism. So I think it might be quite a good idea to send that out then. So yeah, I'd go for that. So having sort of we've thought about the free sessions, we've thought about the free conversations. Let's just move into why you might possibly just go straight into an assessment. And I'll explain my rationale for why I ended up doing this. So after I'd been in practice for a while, I would quite often get referrals from people. And when you get word of mouth referrals, quite often people aren't interested in sort of investigating all sorts of different options. You've been recommended to them. They know they want to work with you, and there's almost like they come ready and prepared to be booked in. And I think sometimes, it can almost sort of put up a barrier. Sometimes people just want to get started. And certainly the last time I went for therapy, I spent quite some time investigating different therapists. I looked around, I knew sort of what I wanted. I found someone and she offered me a free session. I said, could we just go straight into the full session, please? And we went straight into the full session because I knew I was ready to start. I didn't want to faff around. By the time we'd, had a back and forth about times and dates and all the rest of it, by the time she'd answered me and all this sort of stuff, a week or so had gone past and I actually just wanted to get a session in. So sometimes I think, it can be helpful for the client if you get them booked in really quickly. And so offering them as a paid assessment can get them booked in and get them started. And that can be a real advantage for them. And in addition to that, it does mean that you're doing a thorough assessment with them. The other thing that happens is it does deter your people, shall we say, who actually aren't interested in therapy, who are phoning up because they actually want to have that free session where they can take advantage of you as a female counsellor. I'm not probably don't need to say any more than that. You know what I'm talking about. And that was the reason why I went to paid assessments, because I got fed up with those calls. And after about the third time when I'd fallen for it, I even had the same person ring up twice and I fell for it twice. And I just thought, I've got to change the way that I am running these calls. And so, if you say to someone, yeah, okay, so should we get you booked in? And you're asking them for payment up front, you're getting them to book in. Believe me, people who are ringing because they want to masturbate actually aren't interested in booking a full session because they want to get off while they're on the phone to you. So it does deter from that point of view. And that sounds like a very, it doesn't sound like a particularly good reason to do those paid assessments, but that's what worked for me. Get them booked in, get them in front of me. And, for a long time, I didn't actually charge up front. I charged at the end of the session. I did get caught out once with someone who said, can I pay you next week? And never came back. But on the whole, I used to find people would pay me at the end of the session. But I did have someone who kept cancelling their session. And then I said, right, you need to pay up front. And that brought him in. So, often when there is that financial commitment, people will turn up. They've got, as they say, skin in the game. If people have paid for something, it shows that they're serious. It shows that they want to work with you. And I think most of you now actually do charge up front. But, that can often help to get people through the door. They can phone up and then they're committed. When they've paid for it, quite often that does bring people who perhaps are feeling quite scared and nervous about it if they've paid for it. Sometimes people like that because it means that they will actually come along to the session. So let me just check my notes again and see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. I've been talking for a little while now, so I'll probably stop here. Yeah, so those are just a sort of a few things to think about. So, possibly if you do a paid session, people might not want to pay because, they think they're committing themselves to something, so it might put them off. Again, I think it comes back to, thinking through what you want and what sits right with you. And having a rationale really, and then thinking through, okay, so, how do I stop people going too much into a counselling session if I'm just doing a free 15-minute session with them. Can I keep it within the boundaries? Because I offer free sessions for people who want to find out about Therapy Growth Group, and I always overrun, because it's sort of like, can you stick to those boundaries? Are you going to get into what people want to talk about? And just talking about Therapy Growth Group, those of you who are in Therapy Growth Group and who are watching this, I am going to bring out in the next couple of weeks some more information. We've got some training in there already about how to run one of these free conversations, but also I'm going to do some templates around it as well, and that will be coming into Therapy Growth Group in the next couple of weeks. And for those of you who aren't in Therapy Growth Group who might be interested, if you're interested, if you've been thinking about joining, next week, that's the bonus for joining, is that you will get this stuff that will help you. So that's a sales call script, so how to run these free sessions, and an onboarding email. And if I get around to it, you might get a template for a contract as well. So I'm just working on those at the moment. So if that's something you're interested in, pop into the comments, so yes please, and I'll get back in touch with you when it's available. Okay, so I'll finish there. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully that's helped you to think a little bit more about how you might go about doing your sessions and how you might get clients in. And as I say, next week I'll do a more in-depth session about running this sales conversation. You might not like to call it a sales conversation, but this free initial consultation that so many people do that lasts about 15 to 30 minutes. Okay, so I will see you then. Take care for now. Bye.